千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. In Diamond Sutra, this expression appears, Wu Wei Fa. The first two characters are the same. The third character means Dharma. So this is the Wu Wei Dharma. The Dharma, this particular Dharma, is often translated as unconditioned Dharma. So of course, someone who's translating from Buddhist text is not going to use a Taoist term. Wu Wei is seen as a Taoist term, but then in the Chinese translation from Sanskrit, it's the same two characters. So what exactly is unconditioned Dharma? It is the Dharma that is unchanging, always constant, regardless of karmic manifestations. So it is also translated as unconditioned existence or unconditioned phenomena. It is constant, eternal, arising, or existing, regardless of what happens with karmic mechanisms, karmic manifestations in the world. In Buddhist teachings, this eternal, constant concept can be synonymous with nirvana. Therefore, in the Tao context, it is the source of unattached actions. This is because pure intentions arise from the Tao. Indeed, pure intentions are the Tao. They are as real as the eternal nature of your true self. As an example, when you have pure compassion with no hidden agenda, no strings attached, no expectations, this pure compassion is part of your eternal nature that you cultivate from one lifetime to the next. It exists regardless of any changes in the material world. That is what it really means. So we already see now that this Dharma is connected to the Tao concept with the lack of attachment. Now, I also want to highlight its complementary opposite. Remember, Chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching is all about complementary dualities. When we have unconditioned Dharma, unconditioned existence, unconditioned phenomena, what is the complementary opposite? 有为法. The complements of Wu Wei Dharma in the Diamond Sutra often translated as conditioned Dharma. And you can kind of figure out what it means just by understanding the previous, Wu Wei Fa. This is a Dharma that always changes. It is conditional of or dependent upon karmic manifestations in the material world. So that sounds a little bit abstract. It's easier if we think of it simply as it is the Dharma that's dependent on some kind of attachment that comes and goes in the material world. It too is transient. It too is impermanent. In the Tao context, this is the source of attached actions. And let me explain the connection. The attachment here are the transient attachments of the material world. They never last. Lust, greed, desires to possess, whether material things or people, these are all transient. When the desired things change, disappear, or are destroyed or damaged, the attachments for them will also change, perhaps fade. So in talking about this conditioned Dharma, the opposite of way, here's what the Buddha has to say in the Diamond Sutra. So I want to provide you with the translation right away because it is important to understand the meaning of Buddha's words. And before we do that, pay attention to the last three characters of the first line, and you will see that it's conditioned Dharma, your way fa. Now, let's go ahead and translate. Here's what the Buddha said. All conditioned dharmas are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, like dewdrops and lightning flash. They should, as such, be observed. What does the Buddha mean? Let's break it down. We talked about conditioned dharmas like lust, greed for certain things as transient. This is the Buddha's way of emphasizing that. So he said, look at a dream. A dream fades when we wake up. It doesn't matter how real everything seemed while we were dreaming. Upon awakening, that reality in the dream world is all gone without a trace. That is the first concept in the second line, that dharmas are transient like dreams. Then illusions. What about illusions? Well, dreams occur at nighttime. During the day, we can have daydreams or fantasies. These are illusions in the mind. They fade away when we need to deal with actual reality. Daydreams and fantasies do not survive contact with harsh reality. Then we have bubbles. What is that? Well, the Buddha is talking about bubbles in a stream. They come and go. They form and they pop. They don't last. Shadows, same thing. Shadows change when the source of illumination changes. When the light is turned off, the shadows are gone. When the light is moved around, the shadows move around as well. Next, let's talk about dewdrops. We know that dewdrops evaporate as the sun shines upon a new day. At dawn, you may still be able to find dewdrops on a blade of grass. As the morning progresses, it is soon vanished. Same transience applies to lightning flash, but even faster. When there's lightning flash for a split second, the sky is lit up. Perhaps it's a thunderstorm, but once it occurs, it is gone, never to return again. So it is perhaps the most transient of all. So the Buddha says, these things, this transience should be observed as such. His message is that we should regard them as impermanent phenomena, here one moment, gone the next. All material things are no different in essence. They may not disappear quite as quickly as the lightning flash, but they're still impermanent by nature. Now, we can link it to what we have discussed in this chapter, chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching. First, the beginning of this chapter speaks of beauty. And I noted that most of the world is overwhelmingly focused on physical beauty because we're physical beings. And here's the thing. Beauty is transient, but the world not only knows beauty as beauty, but we become attached to it. Once in a while, conditioned dharmas have the illusion of permanence because human perception is short-term. As we become so attached to physical beauty, it can become an obsession. From one moment to the next, it can seem as beauty is forever. In the course of time, though, not from 1 minute to the next, but perhaps 1 year to the next or 1 decade to the next, we see that is definitely not the case. We see the beauty of stars from decades ago change and fade with age. It is no different with money, fame, power, pleasures, and for the exact same reasons. And when you see the reality of the situation, you understand what people are doing. So the Buddha points out that basically we are exhausting ourselves for transient things. People exhaust themselves chasing after things that don't last. They're unreal, they're illusory. From that standpoint, it makes no sense. It is therefore time to reprioritize at a spiritual level, shift more of our time and energy to better, more worthwhile pursuits. That is, unconditioned dharmas, or wu wei, the state of detachment that is eternally aligned with the Tao. That is why Lao Tzu wrote, therefore the sages manage the work of detached actions, and detached actions will be wu wei. It is what lasts. So as we can all see, there is a definite connection, a correspondence between Buddhist teachings and the Tao. What about Confucianism? I mentioned that a moment ago, and as I said, there are still people who think it's diametrically opposed to the free-flowing Tao. This idea is certainly not the case according to Chinese legends, where Confucius regarded Lao Tzu as his master. He learned the Tao from Lao Tzu. So just as Lao Tzu wrote about the wise ruler in this chapter, chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching, Confucius also commented about the same thing. Let me show you. So we've got some text here again, and I want to ask everyone to take a look at the first 2 characters there. The first 2 characters start out with wu wei. This is a quote from Confucius. It is one of the trickier quotes to figure out, because in order to understand it, you also need to know quite a bit of historical and cultural background. That's okay. I will take you through it step by step. So now that you see the first 2 characters are wu wei, what is Confucius saying about that? Let me give you the translation. Those who used wu wei to govern. Was Sun not the only one? What did he do? He sat facing south with reverence. That was all. Now, without historical and cultural context, these lines are going to be puzzling. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Let me start by pointing out the important pieces. First, Sun. What you see here as Shen, what is that? Well, that's actually Emperor Sun, a legendary ruler of ancient China from more than 4,200 years ago. The depiction of Sun is at the bottom of this slide. On the upper right-hand corner of the depiction, it says Di Sun, which means Emperor Sun. Now, as I said, he lived 4,200 years ago, while Confucius lived 2,500 years ago. So this particular emperor predated him by 1,700 years. The works, the history, the deeds of the ancient emperors were required study for all the sages, all the students of the Tao at the time of Confucius and Lao Tzu. So they knew the history quite well. The first two lines basically say Emperor Sun was the emperor who used Wu Wei to govern. And he might be the only one of the legendary emperors. Then the second two lines, the bottom half, what did he do? He sat facing south. What does that mean? Here's where the cultural context comes in. To sit facing south means to sit on the throne. Whether it's the imperial throne or the royal throne, it must face south. It is a long and consistent tradition in all imperial dynasties. The throne customarily faces south because it is the auspicious and proper orientation. This whole concept had an ancient history as well, and it traces back to even before the time of this particular emperor, to the time of I Ching, and possibly even before that. So back in those early days, 5,000 years or more, the ideal orientation for a house was facing south. And this is because ancient China was in the northern hemisphere. In winter time, the sun will occupy the southern part of the sky. The warming rays of the sun will shine from the south, especially in the winter, because, of course, it is cold. So that is why the throne is always facing that direction. And to sit facing south, it just means assuming the role of the emperor. And what Confucius says here is that this particular emperor assumed that role with reverence, meaning respect and dignity, propriety, that he used the Tao, he lived the Tao as he assumed his imperial duties. Okay, what does that mean? So the first line, Wu Wei Er Zi, it's governance with Wu Wei. So the first two characters are the Wu Wei, and then the last character there is governance. So you can translate it as governance with Wu Wei, or use Wu Wei to govern. Other people had translated it as efficient governance without exertion. So that's actually putting in more words in the English language than was actually in the original in the ancient Chinese. But the idea is that you can think of it as governance without attachments. When you govern without attachments, You govern without excessive rules and regulations, and also without excessive interference in people's lives. So look at these two sub-bullets. They basically summarize what it means to have efficient governance without exertion. It just means that the emperor doesn't need to exert himself setting up or commanding the establishment of excessive rules and regulations, or the means of interfering and scrutinizing people's lives. Excessive rules and regulations are a sign that the ruler is too attached to crime and punishment. These excessive rules and regulations, excessive laws, become burdensome for the people. And in response, the people will come up with ways to sidestep or ignore the law. They can do so. They figure out ways to do it without being detected. It is the same with excessive interference. It is a sure sign that the ruler is fixated on the idea that the people must be supervised at all times and kept in line. So what will happen is that people will put up with this monitoring for a while, but then figure out ways on how to hide or evade the government's scrutiny into their private business. So the opposite of this would not be a good way to govern. And that's the point that Confucius is trying to make. Bad governance, the ruler imposes numerous laws to punish people for what not to do. This is the negative approach. What is the complement to that? What is the opposite? This is deterrence. Deterrence is negative. Harsh punishment, relentless enforcement that results in fear. The complement, good governance. The ruler sets an example as guidance for people on what to do, the positive approach. This is encouragement. Encouragement results in positive reinforcement. So the result of good governance, Wu Wei governance, less busy work for government officials, for the emperor, smaller and more efficient government, less waste, less bureaucracy. The focus can then be directed to something that is much more constructive. So how would this be connected to the Tao Te Ching, this chapter that we're studying? Well, Lao Tzu says the sages manage the work of detached actions. This applies to the emperor. Lao Tzu also says the sages conduct the teaching of no words. This matches exactly what Confucius is saying. He's talking about setting a good example, like the ancient emperor who only sat with dignity, respect, meaning that he set an example without overexerting himself to set up laws to punish people. So I want to invite you to pause for a moment to think about all of this that we have just gone over. How can we apply this to life? Well, if you manage your life with attachments, you end up with the negative approach, the bad governance. Have you seen someone like that? Someone who has that negative approach? I think you may have. This is the person who's easily offended. This person has a lot of rules about what he or she will not tolerate. It is a natural consequence that this person will alienate people. People keep their distance, they keep away. Now, on the other hand, if you manage your life with minimal attachments, you end up with a positive approach. You become the change you want to see in the world. It starts with you. Rather than to impose requirements on other people, you impose them on yourself to set a good example. Other people notice this and they become drawn to you. So that's how we can apply this idea to life. Here's my attempt to summarize it in a table. In this right here, I just want to point out first the setting or the context. That's the column where. Ancient kingdom, that's what Lao Tzu spoke of. We can map that in modern times to modern business. And then ultimately, what is the most important? To you, mapped to you. Then let's talk about the who. In the context of the ancient kingdom, it is the ruler. That's the king. And if we switch out some words, instead of ancient kingdom, ancient empire, then the who is the emperor. In the context of modern business, the corresponding elements or person is the CEO. Then we talk about you. So first of all, you are the ruler. You are the king or queen. You are the ruler of your own existence in this world. You are the CEO in the company that is your life. So I think everyone can easily see the analogies. So we have multiple columns to fill out. We have attachments, the negative approach. We have Wu Wei, the positive approach, and then we have the Tao, the ultimate outcome. Let's talk first about what happens when there's what Confucius calls bad governance, what Buddha called conditioned phenomena or conditioned Dharma, the negative approach. We can end up where the king is focused on the royal treasury, the amount of tax collected, the opulence of the palace, the size of his army, and restrictive laws. So that is definitely surface level. It's a focus on transient things, things that don't last. And it's about doing more and too much to be burdensome to the people. How can we map that to the CEO? The correspondence is that the CEO will be focused on sales quota. How much money are we making? Investment portfolio, cost reduction, maximizing profits. And in place of restricted laws in a company, there are rules to restrict people on what they may or may not do. So again, that's at the surface level, focusing on transient things and burdensome to the employees. And you, what about your life? You can definitely be on the wrong path, as many people are in the world today, if you are primarily focused on income, position, the pecking order, possessions, cars, house, boats, things to complain about, things that you will not tolerate, things you don't like, things you criticize or condemn. The negative approach, focusing on transient things, the transient manifestations in the material world. So that is the negative. Now, let's talk about the positive. What if you have a wise ruler, a king who understands the Tao? Well, instead of focusing on the external, on the things that ultimately won't matter that much, the wise king will be focusing on building up the kingdom from within, building roads and bridges, focusing on prosperity and justice for all, safety and security, setting positive example for the people to follow. These are the things that last. Same with the company. The CEO, instead of the transient things, can be focusing on lasting values. That is, service and communication for the customers, quality of the products, to be ethical in business dealings. That will be a wise CEO focusing on what really matters. What about you living your life? You're the king of your kingdom. You're the CEO of your company. This is focusing on the spiritual and physical well-being of yourself, learning and challenging the mind. So, personal code of honor. Here we have basically the health and strength that covers spiritual, mental, and physical aspects of your being. So these are the things that you can use. These are not transient qualities like income, position. So the Tao, if the king can use Wu Wei to govern, the people are happy, productive, and loyal. The kingdom naturally becomes powerful. What about the company? Positive word of mouth spreads, bringing even more customers, more business, and doing so naturally. What about you? Well, increasing refinement of oneself, a naturally joyous feeling, sense of purpose. So the one thing that I want to note out of all these is the word naturally, which occurs in the rightmost column. What happens when you follow the Tao, the path of Wu Wei, is that it leads to a natural progression and advancement. That is the way the world works. So the secret of the sages is just that. They follow these ideas, these basic ideas in the Tao, they apply them, they speak and talk without attachments, they focus on things that are eternal, lasting qualities, not transient quantities in life, and they're able to live a life of the Tao. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.